The future we're working towards, women's health is no longer seen as niche. It's taken seriously, it's studied properly, it's treated with the care it deserves. Diagnoses don't take years, days of unanswered questions and long wait lists, and women paying 20% more out of pocket on healthcare than men, and years spent living in pain and physical discomfort, they're gone. That women feel safe being fully themselves at work. They don't have to lie about PMS and say they have a migraine. They can actually be honest. That taboo is gone. They can reintegrate into the workforce after childbirth in a way that's supported and not rushed or dismissed. There are flexible, respectful working conditions for mothers and for fathers. There's space for hormones and cycles and the reality of our biology without shame or stigma. I think that the world we work towards is a system that's actually built for us, not in spite of us.
Welcome to Women Disrupting Tech. My name is Dirk-Jan Hupkes, and on this podcast I give the women who work in tech the platform they need to inspire and empower each other. Join me on a journey into the world of entrepreneurship, funding, biases and role models to discover the strategies for success in the tech industry. In other words, how women can disrupt tech. Are you ready to listen? Hey, welcome back to Women Disrupting Tech, and thank you for tuning into episode 103. In this episode, I'm joined by Christie, the co-founder of Flouria Health. Her journey started when she faced unexpected fertility challenges and couldn't find clear answers. So, she decided to share her own stories through a podcast called Bumps Along the Way. That podcast became a space for others and, eventually, the foundation for something bigger. Now, Anna and her co-founders are building a world of care that truly sees women in a system that is designed for women. What inspired me about our conversation is how personal her journey has been and how intentional she is in turning that experience into a company that serves others. In this episode of Women Disrupting Tech, we talk about why women's health is still treated as a niche and why that needs to change, the true cost of burnout, fertility challenges and bias in the workplace, and why male allies are essential if we want to fix broken systems. We also cover something that doesn't get enough airtime: finding the right co-founders. You'll learn from Anna that the best co-founders bring complementary skills, different lived experiences, and a shared sense of mission. And while it's not in the episode itself, I think it's worth saying that Anna and I both believe that it's better to take your time when you're trying to find these co-founders. Just like investors, the last thing you want to do is spend the next 10 plus years of your life with people you don't genuinely click with. So when you're ready to listen and learn how Flouria Health is healing women and shaping workplaces, please welcome to Women Disrupting Tech, Christie. Hey, good morning, Anna. Good to have you. Question I always ask at the start is how you got into your current position, in this case of Flouria Health.
Yeah, so the start of my story is that I've been living in the Netherlands for a few years. And after marrying my husband in 2022, I unexpectedly ran into my own fertility and pregnancy loss challenges whilst also working at a pretty fast-paced enterprise tech company. And the pace and pressure of that work environment paired with, I guess, that monthly pain of not falling pregnant resulted in a burnout for me. So I was out of work. I was trying to make sense of this fertility journey, which was something that I felt not many people actually talk that openly about. So then I thought, well, why don't I talk about it? And I felt like the more you open up around these things, the more you realize you're not actually alone. So I decided to make a podcast to help process my own situation, but also connect with other women and learn from experts around how lifestyle changes could support fertility. And so the podcast Bumps Along the Way was born. And that quickly grew into quite an engaged audience of regular listeners and a social media community. And that really validated to me actually how big this problem is. You know, 1 in 6 women, 1 in 6 couples, I should say, will have challenges with fertility.
Wow,
So
I
that
didn't
was,
know it was that prevalent.
yeah, it is. So almost everyone you know will at least know someone that has encountered a fertility
Yeah.
challenge. And that to me was really staggering. So I was on that journey. And then meanwhile, our co-founder Janine was on her own journey. So she had run into her own fertility challenges. That's her story to tell. And she was also struggling to find information and support within the current care system.
How did the two of you meet?
Well, so we met through a mutual friend. Janine basically had this idea. I want to build a platform. I want to help women like me find that care and information. And I think I'd like to position it as an employee benefit so that I can get it into the hands of women at scale. Through those conversations, vetting the idea, having chats with people in the industry, she met a friend of mine who has an employee benefits company in the Netherlands. He suggested that she speak with me because I was speaking so openly about this topic on the podcast. So sort of an organic coming together of people. And Janine was working as a fintech investor at the time. And before this, she actually tried to find a company that was solving this problem that she could invest in.
Hmm.
And when she couldn't find one, a colleague dared her to start it herself. And so she thought, you know what, I will start it myself. And that's actually where the concept came from.
Then you came along.
Yes. So Janine reached out to me to bounce ideas. We went for coffee and yeah, we had a great connection. She had a lot of strategic vision, and she really, from her work as an investor, understood a lot around business models and how you could build this in a scalable way. I could bring my background, which is more commercial and growth. But at first, I actually walked away. And that was because I was still very deep in my own fertility journey, and I actually was making the podcast and I felt like I was already too busy with it. You know that saying, the more you focus on something, the bigger it becomes? I felt like I was already quite fixated on this, and I thought, look, as much as that really hits my heart and I would so love to be involved, I think it's actually not the right time for me. Had surgery for my fertility journey, but I still wasn't fully pregnant. I was contemplating IVF. I just couldn't spend any more time in that world. I walked away and I thought, oh, I really think I'm going to regret that because I think that could have been really great for me. But then actually a few months later, things shifted internally for Flouria and my personal situation was a lot better. And reached out again. By then, I was very early stages pregnant with the son that we have now, Archie. Janine had found Vlatko, our chief technical officer. So I met with them both. We had long chats, and then the timing felt right. And the mission of Floria still resonated with me very deeply. So I jumped at the chance. And that's how I became the third co founder of Floria.
Ah, cool. So, out of curiosity, you started your journey podcasting. Two questions around that. One is, did it help you deal with your own situation?
Yeah, definitely. The podcast helped me in more ways than I even expected, actually, because first of all, it made me feel less alone. A fertility journey can be very lonely. Suddenly, you stop going to parties, you stop being 100% yourself. People around you don't really understand what's changed. So,
Hmm.
I was able to connect with women from all over the world who were on similar journeys, and that gave a lot of comfort because when someone says out loud what you've been silently thinking, it's really powerful. You realize you're not crazy, you're not broken, what you're feeling is really normal. Yeah,
Yeah, I can
it's
imagine that it's also giving you a bit of really like a sense of belonging, almost.
definitely. And what I found was I was searching for resources, not knowing that there are literally Facebook groups and Reddit groups with tens or even hundreds of thousands of people in them, all looking for information and support on certain topics: IVF, fertility, pregnancy loss. And those were not the people who said to me, you know, you just need to relax and then you'll fall pregnant, you know?
Yeah,
Those were the people who they understood how stressful it was, and they were validating me even though actually they were complete strangers on the internet. So you
yeah.
find this online community, and the podcast tied into that as well.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine. So,
Yeah.
and second question I had is, how does it help you deal with users and investors today? Because I don't know about your experience, but for me, it made me open up a bit as also as a person. So I'm a
Yeah.
bit more chatty, a bit more extrovert
Yeah.
almost. So
Yeah.
what's
Yeah.
been
That's
your
really nice.
experience?
Well, I think for me, I've always been in client facing roles, sales,
Mm-hmm.
customer success, etc. So I've always had that, I suppose, ability to connect with people. But the podcast taught me a lot more about connection because I learned that even when women, or I guess just people in general, you can be on a similar journey, like
Mm-hmm.
fertility or pregnancy loss or hormonal health, but their individual experiences are so deeply personal and unique. And even though you're on the same journey, the question became, how do I speak to all of these journeys at once? And
Yeah.
how do I make sure every version of this journey feels seen and understood? And I think that skill is also really essential with Flouria because whilst our core message stays the same, what we do stays the same. How do we bring it to different audiences and different women who are on so many different phases of health? Like the
Mm-hmm.
women's health, the life cycles that we go through are so varied and complex.
Yeah.
So when we're talking to users, especially women navigating their health, we don't have to explain the problem. They live that problem every day. But instead, it's about how do we hear them and then show them how we can help. And I think when it comes to investors, well, Janine really spearheads our investment efforts. As I mentioned, she was an
Mm-hmm.
investor herself. But I have learned that often women's health is still a blind spot. So first we have to help them see the problem and why it matters and why it's been so overlooked. And then why solving it is a major opportunity. And only
Yeah.
then can we introduce the solution. So the
So yeah,
connection, the
really,
communication.
yeah, you really have to talk about the why and deepen that before you can transition to, hey, I've got this wonderful platform that connects women.
Yes, exactly.
Why is it that it's still under research and underfunded female health? Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think that the core problem around women's health and the reason why it's still primarily underfunded, under researched, underinvested is because the roots of that problem, from my understanding, go all the way back to the early foundations of Western medicine. And for centuries, almost all medical research and studies were conducted on the male body, which is a pretty staggering fact, that women were excluded and just pretty much labeled as smaller men, with the exception that we have a uterus and we can be pregnant and give
Yeah.
birth. So there's this very narrow view, which means the full complexity of women's health, especially like hormonal health, menstrual cycles, and how they affect everything from metabolism to mental health, was
Mm-hmm.
either just ignored or misunderstood or pathologized. So imagine for centuries, women being told again and again and again that what they're experiencing isn't valid because it's not happening in the body of a man. Therefore, the belief was it's not
It can't
real,
be.
doesn't. Exactly. It doesn't need to be researched or funded or investigated. And I think it was only until the 1990s that regulatory changes in the US required women to be included in clinical research.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, women were either excluded entirely or too few were included to draw meaningful conclusions. So you have this narrow view, and then you have this very late entry of women into clinical research.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think an important layer is that women's health topics, periods, fertility, menopause, were treated as taboo or niche issues for a very, very long time, even though they affect half the global population. Yeah, so there's a huge cultural discomfort around these conversations, and I believe that slowed down innovation and funding and public awareness. And even today, the gender disparities are huge. Less than 2% of healthcare research funding outside of oncology goes to female specific conditions like endometriosis or PCOS or menopause. So
It's
it's still
also
there.
interesting that you mentioned that it's also 2% because that's where for the funding gap, that's where my journey started. But I wasn't aware that it was also in the same level for female health. That's quite interesting. And you said except for oncology, because there are more research money is poured into. also women specific conditions like breast cancer?
Exactly, exactly. And I think as well, especially when it comes to if we look at health tech,
Hmm.
most founders and investors in this space historically have been men, and that may have meant that products and innovation often maybe misunderstood the real needs. And that means that the solutions were not being built. So not only is it being not properly funded, not properly researched, but the solutions that were being built probably didn't really meet the need.
And
So,
is
yeah,
it also in part, and maybe this is a bit outside the scope, but is it also in part because like things like breast cancer is like really there's a lot of awareness about that. Even I dare to say every man knows that this is an issue that is affecting women,
yeah,
whereas other specific female health related diseases are
mm.
not that well known. Is it also a matter of awareness, you think?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, in Australia, we have the Pink Ribbon
Hmm.
Foundation, which is
Yeah.
an enormous, is that the same globally? Pink
Yeah,
Ribbon?
I'm pretty much sure that it's there in the US for sure. It's there in the UK for sure. I think there's some sort of pink ribbon here in the Netherlands. I know from my own history that breast cancer has been on the forefront here of medical research pretty much since the 90s, I think. So it's
Yeah,
really prevalent. So everyone
yeah,
knows about it because it's something
yeah,
that is talked about. Whereas
yes,
like endometriosis, I didn't know about until a friend of mine ran into that.
yeah. And I think that's very common. It's the same with PCOS. I think that maybe because for a large part there has been this acceptance almost. Yeah, it's okay that your period is painful, but actually
Hmm.
it's not okay. It shouldn't be. It's a monthly report card. And if there's pain, that's a symptom. And so many women, I have two sisters. I went to all girls schools. My world was all built around women. We all thought it was normal to have these symptoms, but in fact, it's really not. And I do think there's a huge lack of awareness. And that's why it can take up to 7 years on average to be diagnosed with endometriosis. Many women are not diagnosed until maybe their 30s or their late 20s when they're trying to have children and it's not working. And that's too late. It needs to come much sooner.
Yeah, yeah, I fully agree. So I was wondering, you've recently given birth to a son.
Yes.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
What type of learnings or what learnings did you have from that process? Because you had quite a fertility journey, let's say. In the end, I dare to say, ended happily.
Yes, it did.
But
Yeah.
how did it shape your own beliefs around female health and the topics that you're
Well,
discussing?
yeah, actually, it taught me something quite surprising, which was that, well, in a way, pregnancy and childbirth is actually the exception to the broader problem in women's health. Because for me, at least, it was one of the only times where I felt like the healthcare system truly acknowledged what I was going through and treated it with care and took it seriously. Whereas even the fertility journey, I was often sent home, come back in half a year, you're young, it will happen. It wasn't given any gravity. And when you look at the history of Western medicine, that actually makes a bit of sense because, as we just talked about,
Hmm.
the only reason that women were looked at as unique was because of pregnancy and childbirth. So that's the only attention that women's health has had in the medical world for centuries. And please don't get me wrong, because I'm incredibly grateful for the support and the care that I received during pregnancy and childbirth and postpartum. But it sort of did validate that deeper issue, which is that we still tend to value a woman's health the most when it's tied to reproduction.
Yeah.
It reinforces this idea that a woman's body is taken seriously when it's making another human.
Hmm.
But what about all the other stages of our health? And that's where we at Floria believe that women, we deserve to be taken seriously in every chapter. And that
Yeah.
includes pregnancy and childbirth, but shouldn't be limited to.
Yeah. So what is the cost if we don't? What happens if we don't do that?
If we don't care for women in every
Yeah.
phase of their health.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think an enormous ripple effect. And the gender health gap, it's not just a woman's problem. It affects everyone. It affects companies, it affects economies, it affects societies.
Hmm. How?
Well, if we don't diagnose and treat early, we
Hmm.
know that the average absenteeism rate for women last year was 4% compared to 2.6% for men. Globally, female employees show 32% more burnout than males. So
Hmm.
there's absenteeism, there's burnout that directly impacts productivity and career progression. So there's a huge opportunity loss there. I believe the chronic health issues without mental health support leads to anxiety, depression, emotional exhaustion. These were all things I experienced during my own fertility journey.
Hmm.
So that compounds workplace costs as well as personal suffering. The long-term healthcare costs are staggering. You know, when you
Oh, yeah.
delay diagnosis and treatment, conditions can often become more severe and more complex, and that means they're more expensive to manage. There was a woman in Australia who estimated her expenses living chronically with endometriosis was $400,000 over 2 decades. And that includes lost income due to unpaid sick leave. That's just an example.
400,000 Australian dollars.
Yeah. The cost of living with endometriosis.
Yeah, and then put on top of that the loss of income and the impact of that long term, because income that you don't earn now, you don't, at least in the Netherlands, you also don't earn a pension on that.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
it compounds later throughout your entire life as a woman.
Exactly. Exactly. Healthier women means stronger workplaces, more resilient economies, a more sustainable, manageable healthcare system.
Hmm.
50% of the global population. So, of course, earlier care is going to solve a tremendous challenge.
So the business case is quite clear. So let's talk about Floria for a period of time. How do you solve for this? How do you solve for the lack of awareness of and lack of knowledge, indeed,
Yeah.
of female health issues that have such a broad ripple effect?
So, Flouria addresses the lack of knowledge in three ways. We believe it all starts with education, so
Hmm.
empowering women with the knowledge to become their own health advocate. And one of the biggest challenges both Janine and I faced on our own journeys was the sheer amount of often conflicting, contradictory, often harmful information online.
Hmm.
Instagram, TikTok, blogs, just too much hits on Google, it became very overwhelming and you just don't know which content and information you can trust. So by Floria, we develop all of our content in-house. It's all medically vetted by our team of women's health specialists.
Hmm.
So it's content that you can read and you can trust. And yeah, actually the feedback from our users really reflects how valuable that is.
Okay, so I have a question around that, because we just talked about medical research still, let's say, women's health is really grossly under researched. So how do you ensure that you get to the right information? Because to your point, there's really a lot of misinformation, a lot of fake stuff out there. I don't know why people do that, maybe with good intentions, maybe not so good, I don't know. But how do you vet this information? How do you ensure
Yeah.
that it's really the right information?
Yeah, so it's vetted by our team of women's health specialists. So, fertility doctor, integrative women's health specialists, perinatal mental health psychotherapists. So, these are people who work in the industry, are up to date with the current science and research and information, and are trained extensively in this area.
Hmm.
So, we, of course, trusting their sources and their knowledge and their work that they do with women also every day, because we also want it to have a tone of empathy and
Hmm.
humanity as
Yeah.
well. So that's how we vet it. Women themselves can also vet it. So we didn't stop at just content and information, because we know that once you start reading and learning, you naturally have questions.
Hmm.
So if you're a user of Floria, you can actually also chat with one of these women's health experts and specialists, and you can ask them directly any question anytime, even if it's just, well, what is the source of this information? But
Hmm.
it could also be around your own health and well-being. They can help you make a plan. They can answer your questions. So it also then leads to people taking action, which is really nice. So it starts with education, then it moves into conversation, and then it moves into actually building a plan and taking action together.
And how do you use that data from conversations? Do you use it at all? Also to optimize content?
We obviously have built AI into the platform so that if you're following a particular journey, let's
Hmm.
say it is endometriosis,
Hmm.
you will be served more relevant content to you. And
Hmm.
that's deliberate because we also know if you're following content around fertility, it could actually be quite triggering to be fed content around pregnancy. You know, that's something that you so aspire towards, but you don't want to see it just yet because you're not there yet. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we have built the tech in a way that is trying to feed content that's the most relevant.
So you're using a tech solution that is for a topic that is really, let's say, intimate. How do you ensure that it's also empathetic to women? Because I think
Yeah.
empathy is a really important driver of making that connection with users, but also with maybe other interested parties.
Yeah, that's actually something that's been very important for us from day one. So we kept running into chat functions claiming to support women, but actually they were just automated bots. And honestly, that's incredibly frustrating when you're dealing with something as intimate and personal as your health. So
Yeah,
what we did at Flouria was we wanted to feel like your best friend in your back pocket that just
yeah.
so happens to be an expert in PCOS or neurodiversity or sleep or whatever it is that you're navigating. Because that sense of talking to a trusted friend, that's really what we try and convey at Flouria. So
Yeah.
our chat function isn't a bot. It is a real human. It's a certified women's health specialist. These are real people who are trained to offer both clinical advice, but also speak with a human and empathetic tone. And we keep all of that in house so that we can also ensure that every interaction reflects that, warm and safe tone. And yeah, of course, we need the tech, we need to streamline experiences, and we need to be able to scale. But no matter how that tech evolves, we won't ever compromise on that feeling of being emotionally safe and able to open up and share.
How do you scale it though? Because you can't scale in humans. At least maybe to a limited extent you can, but not in the long run. If you want to take this, let's say, global, it's pretty difficult to have that same expert still doing all the typing and maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's how you scale it
Hmm.
is really more the future of where we're heading towards with Floria. And unfortunately, can't say too much around that. But yes, you can scale it with human operations. So I think what's important as well is if you do take a solution like this within wider Europe or even globally, you'll need specialists, regional, local specialists who understand the local system and
Hmm.
understand the local advice. So there
Yeah.
would be a human level. But I also think that that's where, AI and machine learning can become a big part of our platform, an even bigger part of our platform.
Yeah.
So we need to see where we take that. But there are some things that will never change, and definitely that feeling like you're talking to a trusted friend, that will always be a part of it.
Okay. I suggest we move into a bit more of the also of the practical space of what it go back also to the question what journey has taught you so far. If there's one advice or one experience that you've had building Floria, what is an advice that you would pass on to other startup founders in the same space?
My advice would be two things. Number one, find the right people to build it with.
Hmm.
With Janine and Vlatko, it was an instant feeling. Janine and I were meant to have a quick 30-minute coffee. I
Hmm.
think we ended up speaking for nearly 2 hours, really connecting over the experiences we went through and this problem and how big it is and what an
Hmm.
opportunity it is, but also what would it take to really build something meaningful that can solve it. And
Hmm.
I could tell that we had different but complementary skill sets, and that's really what you want in a founding team. And it was the same with Vlatko. So, first of all, I had full trust in Janine that she would
Mm.
fight hard to bring the best person on board that she could.
Huh?
And when I met him, that conversation really only reinforced that. He was thoughtful, he was mission driven. Again, my gut felt really good. So I think, yeah, find the right people to build it with, find
Mm-hmm.
people that have skill sets that are complementary, fill each other's gaps. You can challenge each other. I think that's actually very healthy.
Mm-hmm.
People that don't get tied to their own ideas, but can actually step aside and really see it from a user's perspective, and people that you can trust the way that they think, not just what they do. I think that's really
Yeah.
important.
How do you, because I understand the connection you had with Janine, how did that work with Flotco? Because that to me is a bit like a man working in female health tech is still rare, I think. And I want
Yeah,
to give maybe if there's any men listening to this, also to give them the perspective, hey, it can be done. What makes him a good CTO except for the technical skills? So there was
I
mission
think,
driven part.
yeah, he came across to me as very mission driven, someone that actually really understands and believes that this is a problem worth solving. Someone like
Mm,
yourself, actually. I really appreciate the way he thinks and the way he looks at this. And I think sometimes having the male perspective, it can challenge you in different ways as well.
mm-hmm,
And I think that's really important. He obviously has incredible technical skills, but it's more the way he approaches things that really inspired me to work with him. I asked a lot of questions. I don't just rely on my gut, although that is a big part of it. And yeah, seeing the way he thought through it all made me very interested to see, yeah, what it would be like to work with him. And it still is. So I
okay.
think you can be an ally in this space and not be a woman,
Mm-hmm,
and you can have the passion to solve the problem.
mm-hmm,
You can have your own intention and your own, yeah, what's the word I'm looking for? Motivation. And
yeah.
that should be also okay. If it's only women solving this problem, it becomes an echo chamber. So you need male allies.
Yeah, well, that I fully agree with. So you need indeed need a man also to start understanding that the whole female health space is a bit broader than just the two best known issues and the most obvious issues that women face.
Yeah.
In terms of fundraising, how do you approach that? Because Janine is in charge of that. I think she's has an investor background, but is there a specific approach that is needed to promote FemTech? Because I think FemTech sort of within female health is still an even smaller quote unquote niche.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting that it's seen as niche when it's something that affects half the population, but I understand that it is. Yeah, so Janine leads all our fundraising efforts. And
Hmm.
we're very lucky to have her background and her skill set. For me, it's something that I'm getting involved in and I'm still learning. Good to be challenged by people who have seen countless business models over the years.
Hmm.
Last year, we raised within our own networks, which of course is not uncommon for very early stages.
Hmm.
I think what I learned out of that experience last year was that actually you can find pockets of money in many places. And in fact, we do get quite a lot of interest. But if you want to do it right, especially something as complex and, yeah, as big as a challenge as this is, we want to solve it the right way. And that's going to take time. And we need
Hmm.
space and flexibility to test and fail and then maybe pivot. So it was about finding the right partners, investors that don't just write a check, but also think along with you and believe in the vision, and they understand that flexibility is everything. So what we at least didn't want was to be pigeonholed into any one mold of Flouria, if you know what I mean, because
Hmm.
we still need that space. And so finding investors who agreed with that was really crucial for us.
Yeah. So how do you do that? What kind of characteristics are you looking for?
Yeah, I think that it all comes down in the end to, do they understand the problem that needs to be solved? Are they willing to think along? What types of governance and controls are there in this agreement?
Mhm.
Is there opportunity and space to pivot? It's a conversation that you have. And then I think from there, you can really get a good feel for if it's going to be the right partner.
And in your experience, is that so far, is it more females or women who invest in your proposition, or are there also men, few good men?
Yes, there are a few good men. I think the experience was pretty revealing. I can't tell you the amount of times I called someone in my network, perhaps a male angel or investor. Two things happen. First, they almost always assume that I'm calling for advice, not to actually present a real investment opportunity.
Hmm.
And then when I explain, actually, I'm not calling for advice. This is what I'm calling about. It's an investment opportunity. Almost like clockwork suggests that I speak to a female investor because it's more their thing, or this is not something that they really understand. And that one always makes me laugh because I think what's so hard to understand about a platform that's solving a healthcare challenge for half the population?
Yeah, that's interesting. But is it also, again, going back to that it's taboo for men, that they just don't feel comfortable talking about it, and as a result, not comfortable investing in it?
Yeah, it could be. And I shouldn't generalize because it really depends on the person. So, aside from what I just said, there are incredible male allies in this space. I think for a lot of men, perhaps the ones that we've noticed that are interested maybe have a wife or a sister or a very close friend who went through something themselves. Maybe it was menopause, maybe it was a
Yeah.
fertility journey. So, some people immediately understand the wider opportunity that femtech represents, whereas others still see it as this niche or soft category. So it can create a bit of an uphill battle, but I think it also is just a new and developing category.
Yeah, I was about to ask: is this a matter of awareness mostly,
Could
that
be.
people are aware that this is happening in their own backyard, maybe even, and b also that this is a huge opportunity, because I remember that there was a McKinsey study that solving for the female health gap would result in a 10 trillion US dollar per year rise in GDP.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that's what's interesting to me is that some people do still view it as a sort of soft category
Hmm.
when I think towards, yeah, it's going to be billions-dollar industry. And as you did say, 1 trillion, I believe it's 1 trillion per year annually by 2040. And it's growing into a huge industry. So I do think there's a lack of awareness. And I do think that sometimes the size of the opportunity is overlooked, but it's then about finding people that understand the scale of the problem and therefore the size of the opportunity.
Yeah.
Um,
Do you see that group grow, by the way, in terms of attention and trends? Maybe also, do you see the group of interested health investors grow?
I do think it's growing. Yeah, I do think it's growing. I think that part of the challenge might be that some of these early femtech solutions often miss the mark. That might have wounded the image of the sector earlier on. But
Yeah.
I do think now that truly thoughtful user centered solutions are being taken seriously. You see a lot more attention, you see a lot more conversation, you see a lot more events. And I hope that earlier pioneers in this space would also feel that. Yeah, for ourselves, we're very excited to be a part of that. We are actually hosting our own event on May 14th, which is called FemTech Unite. And it's really the first of its kind in the Netherlands. We're bringing together investors and startups and investors and corporations, all from the local and international femtech ecosystem. There'll be a keynote from Ida Tin, who really coined the term femtech. So yeah, I think the next wave of progress is coming. I think it's here.
Well,
Exciting.
is exciting news also from the event. Yeah, if you haven't bought your tickets, you can do that via, what's the app's name?
Luma.
Luma. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And also via LinkedIn. We're actually sharing a lot of information about it on LinkedIn.
Okay, cool. So we'll include those links in the show notes. I want to move to the future. Let's suppose that Flouria becomes wildly successful, really beyond, even beyond your dreams. What does the future of female health look like then? What happens if you are successful? Or maybe if a female health just gets the attention that it deserves?
Yeah, I love this question because that's what drives me and the team every single day. The future we're working towards, women's health is no longer seen as niche.
Hmm.
It's taken seriously, it's studied properly, it's treated with the care it deserves. Diagnoses don't take years, days of unanswered questions and long wait lists, and women paying 20% more out of pocket on healthcare than men, and years spent living in pain and physical discomfort, they're gone.
Hmm.
That women feel safe being fully themselves at work. They don't have to lie about PMS and say they have a migraine. They can actually be honest. That taboo is gone. They can reintegrate into the workforce after childbirth in a way that's supported and not rushed or dismissed. There are flexible, respectful working conditions for mothers and for fathers. There's space for hormones and cycles and the reality of our biology without shame or stigma.
Hmm.
I think that the world we work towards is a system that's actually built for us, not in spite of us, I guess, or
Yeah.
because we can bear children.
Yeah. Well, why is it important to also accommodate for fathers?
Because I think if you only accommodate for women, it again just becomes a women's problem. And if there are more respectful working conditions also for fathers, that promotes and supports women's contribution in the workforce.
Yeah, and also you take it out of the discrimination area because those facilities are available to men and women equally.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like we work in a system that understands that we go through phases of health and well-being, but doesn't quite hit the mark with supporting that. And supporting men as much as women is also important because, yeah, it takes the load off it only being the woman's problem.
Yeah. So, what role can men play besides being your CTO and being a supporter of female health issues, or yeah, promoter of female health?
Yeah, I think it depends if you look at it from a societal view or more of a
Hmm.
workplace view. If we look at the workplace, men still primarily for the large percentage are in positions of leadership. They're the ones setting the policies, they're the
Yeah.
ones making the decisions. So, first of all, educating yourself on these are not excuses that women are bringing to get out of work. These are
Hmm.
real life affecting conditions that women are living with. So how can you as a company leader or a manager or a person who's in a position to make decisions, take that knowledge and build policies that support those women throughout their journey, no matter what it may be? I think from a societal view as well, it's similar. It's the same awareness, education, support. Yeah, not being like afraid of a taboo. Speak about these things and ask the questions.
And also not judging.
Exactly. Yeah, eliminate judgment, come from a place of empathy. These are big things. That's a huge cultural shift, but it just starts with the individual person themselves, and that ripple effect can be really huge.
Yeah. Yeah. True. That's and also maybe also stop with the jokes about oh it's she's on her period, or oh it must be menopause. So if you the final piece of it is also what is the role, because we talked a bit about the role of men in leadership, what is the role of government policy here? How can governments accommodate this more? Should there be, for instance, quota, research quota for female health, so minimum?
I think that when it comes to following the money, I suppose, for
Hmm.
both public and private innovation funding, there doesn't seem to be, from my understanding, any mandatory reporting or accountability around gender and health. So you have European and Dutch innovation funding programs like Horizon or the EIC Accelerator, and they often encourage diversity or they ask for statements, but they don't require any hard data or enforce any minimum thresholds. So that's a bit of a loophole
Hmm.
that allows funding to continue flowing into male dominated teams and solutions.
Yeah, I talked to RVO before the weekend, and they said, well, yeah, it's an absolute plus if you have a diverse team, and we look at it through that
Yes.
lens. And I was trying to tease them to like, okay, how do you enforce if that changes? How do you enforce
Yeah.
that? Yeah, we have what's it called, a disclosure requirement, but
Yeah.
there's nothing really tangible done about it because it's sort of seen as out of the hands of the government, which to some extent I understand because you don't want to overregulate. On the other hand, you're putting money as a government, as a
Yeah.
society, into startups with the objective to, well, maybe support the inclusive culture. Then you need to also have the how do you say, really have the stick in place
Yeah,
as well,
exactly.
not just a
Yes. Yeah,
carrot.
you'll see DEI plans in grant applications, but very few mechanisms to hold recipients accountable. So, yeah. Imagine if to receive EU funding or tax incentives, you had to show that you're backing diverse founders and not just in the gender of the founding team, but also the kinds of problems that you're solving. That would completely reshape what's considered investable and it would fast track change. So, yeah, a regulation like this would change what gets funded and where the money goes, and that changes what gets built and who builds it and who benefits from it. So, yeah, I
Yeah,
think
that's
that would make a huge change.
and that sounds like a really great place to close. Anna Christie, thank you very much for a really insightful conversation. If people want to learn more about you, connect with you, and learn more about Flouria Health, where would you like to send them?
Yes, well, our website is a pretty easy one. It's floria.health. I'm always open myself to connecting on LinkedIn as well. And we do post a lot of updates and developments on our Floria LinkedIn page as well.
Cool. And we'll include those links in the show notes. So once
Great.
again, thank you very much, Anna, for the wonderful conversation. Listeners, thank you very much for listening. And until the next episode, keep being awesome. Well, that's a wrap for episode 103 of Women Disrupting Tech with Anna Christie on how Flouria Health is healing women and shaping workplaces. Anna and I hope that you found our conversation as empowering as we intended it to be. And if you'd like to learn more about or connect with Anna and Flouria Health, please head over to the show notes for a link. As usual, you can find the show notes at womendisruptingtech.blog. When you've enjoyed listening to this episode, please follow the podcast on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or Amazon. Following Women Disrupting Tech is a great zero-cost way to support Anna and my other guests in making inclusion in tech the new normal by the end of 2032. You can also follow Women Disrupting Tech on social media. Please check out at The True Story Company on LinkedIn and Instagram, or at Women Disrupting Tech on YouTube and Substack. On Substack, I share more in-depth stories and behind-the-scenes insight about each episode and about the trends I've identified over the past 100 plus episodes. So if you want to learn more about Women Disrupting Tech, please subscribe to my Substack. Finally, if you want to connect with me, please do so via email dirkjan@womendisruptingtech.blog or on Substack or on LinkedIn. On LinkedIn, you can connect by searching for my name, Dirk-Jan Hupkes, and then you'll find me. With that, I wish you a wonderful day. I hope to see you in the next episode, and until then, keep being awesome.